German sniper instructor holds the American rifle across his workbench like a corpse for autopsy. His hands, trained for 2 decades on Zeiss precision, move over the offset scope mount with something close to disgust. The optic is smaller than his fist, fixed magnification, stamped steel adjustment turrets. A hunting sight from an American mail-order catalogue, welded to a battle rifle by a Connecticut company that had spent the last 40 years making scopes for deer hunters in Maine. He removes it, weighs it in his palm, then he looks at the report on the desk beside him. 17 dead officers. 1 American shooter. 3 days in a Vosges valley in November 1944. Every kill between 400 and 600 meters. The instructor was trained to believe that precision was a science, that optics were a craft, that only Germany understood the geometry of a bullet in flight. And now he holds in his hand a scope his wife could have ordered from Sears, Roebuck for $12, and he cannot explain a single one of the dead. For 30 years, German optical supremacy was not a boast, it was a physical fact. In workshops in Jena and Wetzlar, apprentice lens grinders spent 7 years learning to polish a single element by hand. The Zeiss ZF-39, adopted by the Wehrmacht in 1939 as the standard sniper optic, was a small cathedral of glass, 4 times magnification, etched reticle with bullet drop compensation calibrated to 800 meters, each lens hand-ground, each tube nitrogen-purged, each adjustment cut on a lathe that had been aligned by a master craftsman who had learned his trade from a master craftsman who had learned his trade from Carl Zeiss himself. A single ZF-39 required 32 separate manufacturing steps and passed through the hands of 11 specialists before it was cleared for issue. The scope was then mounted on a Carabiner 98K rifle by another specialist, a gunsmith who matched the mount to the individual weapon so precisely that the pairing could never be undone without recalibration. This was German sniping. It was slow, it was expensive, and in 1940, in 1941, in 1942, it was the finest in the world. The Americans, when they arrived at the problem, arrived late. In 1940, the United States Army had no serious sniper program. Its designated sharpshooter rifle was a version of the 1903 Springfield with a commercial Weaver scope bolted to the receiver, a stopgap so obviously inferior that the Marine Corps quietly bought unearthed target scopes on the civilian market rather than issue what the Army provided. But the deeper problem lay in the American service rifle itself. The M1 Garand, the finest infantry weapon of the war, could not be scoped. Its en-bloc clip loaded from the top and ejected upward with a metallic ping, throwing a steel packet directly through the space where a telescopic sight would sit. Every attempt to mount a conventional scope over the receiver produced a rifle that either could not be reloaded or could not be aimed. For 3 years, the American sniper had to give up his Garand and pick up a bolt-action rifle less capable than the German weapon he was meant to counter. In a war being won by American semi-automatic firepower, the American sharpshooter was fighting with the enemy's technology. The solution came from a New York gunmaker called Griffin & Howe, a company better known for building custom hunting rifles for Wall Street millionaires than for solving battlefield problems. Their engineers, working through Springfield Armory in the winter of 1943, did something the Germans never seriously attempted. They did not redesign the rifle. They did not redesign the scope. They moved the scope to one side. The mount they developed offset the optic to the left of the receiver, clearing the ejection port completely, letting the en-bloc clip fly free while the shooter aimed. The shooter learned to cant his head slightly, to place his cheek against the stock at a new angle. It was awkward. It was inelegant. A Zeiss engineer, shown the drawings, would have called it a mistake. But it worked. And in June 1944, 1 week after the invasion of Normandy, the United States Army adopted it as the M1C Garand sniper rifle. A simpler variant, the M1D with a barrel-mounted scope block, followed months later. The scope itself was the second heresy, and to a German optician it was the deeper one. The Army did not commission a new sight. It did not go to Bausch and Lomb and demand a wartime equivalent of the Zeiss ZF-39. It went to Lyman, a Connecticut company that had spent the previous 40 years making scopes for deer hunters in Maine and Michigan. The M81 and M82 sights, and later the M84 that would become standard, were militarized versions of the Lyman Alaskan, a commercial hunting scope that sold in pre-war sporting goods catalogs for $14. Fixed 2.5 power magnification, stamped steel adjustment turrets, a simple tapered post reticle designed for a hunter shooting whitetail at 200 yards, no bullet drop compensation, no fine calibration, no craftsmanship in any sense a German optician would recognize the word. What the American scope had, instead, was one quality the Germans had never valued. It could be manufactured, tested, and packed for shipment in 22 minutes. By late 1944, the philosophical contrast was complete, and it favored the country that had barely known how to spell the word sniper 4 years earlier. The German sniper schools at Zossen and Seetaler produced roughly 1,200 qualified shooters between 1942 and 1945, each carrying a rifle and scope pairing that could not be replaced without sending both pieces back to a specialist. The American Sniper School at Camp Perry produced the same number in 11 weeks, each carrying a rifle that could be repaired by any armorer in any battalion, with a scope that could be swapped for a spare from a wooden crate marked M84 without so much as a screwdriver adjustment. The German sniper had a masterpiece, the American sniper had a tool, and the war, by the winter of 1944, had become a place where tools were killing masterpieces every day. In the Pacific, the difference showed itself in the shape of the fight. On Peleliu, on Okinawa, on the volcanic ridgelines of Iwo Jima, American Marines with M1C rifles found themselves in engagements the German training manuals had never anticipated and the Japanese doctrine had no answer for. Japanese officers standing to give orders were dropped at 600 yards by shooters who could then fire 7 more rounds without lifting their heads from the stock. A Marine sniper on Okinawa reported engaging 4 separate Japanese soldiers in under 15 seconds from a coral outcrop east of Shuri Castle, killing all 4 before the last man could reach cover. In the same 15 seconds, a Kar 98K sniper would have fired twice, at most 3 times, working the bolt between each round, exposing himself with every motion, losing his sight picture with every stroke. The semi-automatic action, dismissed by German doctrine as too imprecise for serious sharpshooting, had become the decisive variable of the sniping war. The shot that hit the target did not have to be as good as the German shot. It only had to arrive 4 seconds sooner. In Europe, the same arithmetic played out in slower, colder places. Along the Siegfried Line in November 1944, in the pine forests of the Hurtgen and the frozen villages of the Vosges, American sniper teams from the 3rd, the 4th, and the 90th Infantry Divisions began to appear in German after-action reports with a frequency that alarmed the sniper school at Zossen. One battalion diary from the 361st Volksgrenadier Division, captured intact in early 1945, recorded that officers had been forbidden from wearing rank insignia in daylight, from riding in the front seats of vehicles, from standing near map tables in the open, and from moving between forward positions except at a run. The diary named no American shooters. It described no American rifles. It listed only the dead, 31 officers in a single week across a 4-kilometer front, and the observation, in the handwriting of an unnamed adjutant, that the enemy sniper appears to fire more rapidly than doctrine considers possible for a scoped weapon. The adjutant did not know what he was describing. He was describing an M1C. He was describing an offset mount and a $14 hunting scope. He was describing the arithmetic of a rifle that reloaded itself. When the first intact M1C was captured and sent back to the German optical laboratories, the report that came back was one of the strangest documents of the war. The scope was disassembled. The lenses were measured on the same benches that had qualified the ZF-39. The reticle was compared under magnification. On every technical metric the Germans knew how to measure, the American optic was inferior. The glass was less clear. The magnification was lower. The adjustments were coarser by a factor of 3. The mount was crooked, offset to the wrong side of the receiver, held on by 4 screws that the analyst noted were of a commercial thread pattern used by American plumbers. And yet the rifle attached to it had, in the hands of a single American shooter, over 3 days in the valley south of Bruyères, produced casualty figures that no German sniper in the same sector had matched in a month. The laboratory report ended with a sentence that has survived in a Bundesarchiv file. The weapon is not superior. The doctrine is superior. The industry is superior. The scope is not the problem. They understood at the end what they had lost to. It was not the glass. It was not the mount. It was not any single component that a German engineer, given 6 months and a workshop and a supply of good tool steel, could not have surpassed. It was the fact that the American scope existed at all, on a battle rifle, in the hands of every sniper section of every infantry regiment in every theatre of the war, in quantities that made replacement a matter of paperwork rather than craft. Germany had built 1,200 masterpieces. America had built more than 27,000 tools. And in the mathematics of a war that reached from the Ardennes to Iwo Jima, 27,000 tools did the work that no number of masterpieces could match. The instructor at the workbench in Zossen, holding the $12 scope in his palm, wrote no formal conclusion in his notes. He simply set the optic down beside the report and closed the file. His apprentices, who had spent 7 years learning to grind lenses that would never see combat, because there were not enough of them, and never would be, went back to their benches. In a warehouse in Springfield, Massachusetts, 4,000 Lyman scopes were being packed into wooden crates for shipment to Antwerp. In a factory in Middlefield, Connecticut, another shift was clocking in to make the next 4,000. In a training range at Camp Perry, another 600 American shooters were learning to cant their heads slightly to the right, to put their cheek against the stock at a new angle, to fire 8 rounds without losing sight of the target. The war had one more winter to run, and in that winter, in valleys and forests and coral ridges from the Rhine to the Pacific, the shot that killed the German officer, the shot that killed the Japanese captain, the shot that ended a career or a family or a life, would not be the beautiful shot. It would be the shot that came from a hunting scope, on an offset mount, fired by a rifle whose designer had never intended it to carry glass. The beautiful shot had lost the war. The good enough shot had won it. And the men who understood optics as a craft, holding in their hands the evidence of a nation that understood optics as a product, closed their files and waited for the end. There is a lesson buried in that closed file, and it is not the one the German instructor was trained to see. Precision, when it becomes precious, becomes rare. Rarity, in a war of continents, becomes irrelevance. The Zeiss ZF-39 was the finest sniper scope of the Second World War. It killed almost nothing in the last 12 months of the war because there were not enough of them, and the rifles they were mounted on could not fire fast enough, and the shooters who carried them could not be replaced when they fell. The Lyman M84 was, by any craftsman's standard, a toy. It killed everything it was pointed at, because there were tens of thousands of them, and the rifle it was mounted on fired 8 rounds without a break, and the shooter who carried it was one of 1,000 American shooters trained that summer alone. Enough beat perfect. Not because enough was good, because there was enough of it, everywhere, always, and perfect had run out.